Hi everybody, my name is Sophia. So this is my project today. It's called the WIMP Miracle and Dark Matter Model. My advisor is Professor Demiragli from the physics department. She's super cool. So I'll do a quick overview of my project. So this is pretty much culminating into a scientific paper which has a comprehensive literature review. There's a particle physics study and calculation, as well as conducted interviews that I had with a lot of undergraduate students and professors. And then the main topic on this is that the dark matter model provides a theoretical framework for weakly interacting massive particles, or WIMPs. So I'll do a quick disclaimer. This entire presentation is basically about nothing. I'm going to discuss with you for the next few minutes about absolutely nothing. But first, I'll give a quick general base number. So this is a little misleading, but this is the mass of the universe, around 10 to the 60. It's not actually the mass of the universe. There's a big range depending on what sort of source you look at. But it's divided into two main parts. So 15% of it is normal matter. I'm talking about things that we really understand about, like space and the universe. So anything made up of atomic particles, or so like stars, galaxies, planets, human beings, other visible objects, me and you. I'm going to use normal matter as like a general basis. The correct term is baryonic matter, but that's beyond this. And so the other percentage of the mass of the universe is 85%, which is what we call dark matter. Now, quick other disclaimer, we have no idea what that is. However, throughout my research, I did figure out, in order to really describe what dark matter could be, I made two distinct characteristics for them. So the first is that it does not emit, reflect, or absorb light, and the second is that it must reasonably account for the percentage of mass within the universe. I will also add that there is some information about it must also account for a lot of the universal phenomena that we see and observe. But this is part of what I consider to be the model, or the dark matter model. The next part is the thermal equilibrium. I won't go too in-depth into this, but just know that this is sort of the process that kind of describes the early universe and why the dark matter particle would come to be. And so we have hot temperatures in the early universe. Dark matter particle will coexist and annihilate itself with its respective antiparticle. As the universe expands, average thermal energy will decrease and annihilations will continue. A lot of words, but just know that this is sort of the situation that's going on, and this is how we know that there is reasonable belief for what dark matter, or at least there's reasonable belief for dark matter to exist. Now this brings me into what could possibly fit into this model. And this is where I looked into weakly interacting massive particles, or what scientists like to call WIMPs. And so these are some characteristics of them that fits into the model I described earlier. So they're not visible within the electromagnetic spectrum, can exist in large quantities, and they're neutral. Massive can only be large enough for weak interactions, and they're heavy and slow moving. And then this kind of fills in the holes that the model that I talked about earlier sort of presents. And so on top of this, I spent around a few months learning particle physics. This was super difficult, but this was a calculation that's kind of all of my research that I went to. My advisor helped me do a bunch of crazy math that I didn't necessarily understand, but there's a lot of assumptions and notations here that may or may not actually have happened. And so in order for this calculation to work, it has to fill in a bunch of holes that the model created. And so this is what's considered the WIMP miracle. It's the ability of WIMPs to perfectly fit into the dark matter model. And so the WIMPs were basically curated hypothetically, and they're a theoretical particle that fits into this culminating model that we create. But my next disclaimer is that WIMPs are not necessarily real. And that is because, well, they're theoretical. If you read any sort of paper that says or discusses WIMPs, it always is preceded by theoretical WIMPs, hypothetical WIMPs, because we basically don't know what dark matter is. And so in order to create a particle that's kind of super theoretical and hypothetical, and we still don't know what we're looking at. However, there is also reasonable belief for WIMPs to exist, which is why research is continually being done under this field. So this brings me into a discussion about the theoretical framework, which is basically used to narrow down scope of information and research. And so in this case, the dark matter model, which is the existence of dark matter within the universe, which is a phenomenon. However, all of the timeline-based events that occur create a hole for the WIMP particle to fit into. And that's what I consider to be the theoretical framework of the research. And so these were some quotes of things that I looked into when I looked directly into theoretical frameworks. It pretty much pulls together all of the data you collect, and then you fit it into a sort of specific narrative or viewpoint. And then this is also just another piece of information about how the WIMP miracle encompasses all the necessities of the dark matter model. And so the dark matter model and the WIMP miracle itself is one of many separate dark matter models. There's plenty of other candidates, and there's plenty of other hole-filling theoretical frameworks that go into it. But I did have some discussions in a survey where I asked a bunch of people, or I had a bunch of people ask me questions, and the main thing that I figured out that was the trend amongst this is that we use these theoretical frameworks to explain the way, or to explain why things are the way they are. And so in this case, yes, this presentation is basically about nothing. However, eventually we create these models to understand not only our universe, but also the things around us. And so while WIMPs and research on dark matter can be basically about not much information or things that we don't necessarily understand, eventually this presentation will be about something. And so when you take your research and you kind of challenge yourself into it to understand it, eventually, yes, there is a process that it takes, and yes, there may or may not be a result to the research, but eventually those efforts and your ability to look into those things will eventually culminate into something super cool and with a clear answer. Thank you.
Are there any questions in the audience?
Okay, yes, you can start.
So, great presentation about nothing.
Thank you.
So a little bit of the M in WIMP stands for massive, right? Mm-hmm. This is in relation to other particles. How massive are we talking? Like what is the relative size of one WIMP?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think early in the universe, a lot of the particles that exist are like protons and neutrons, and then eventually, hundreds of thousands of years later, we have like electrons. In terms of WIMPs, I think they can be anywhere from the mass of a proton to anywhere larger. I'm pretty sure that's what I looked into. So when we talk massive, we're like massive in relation to other elementary particles.
Hi, so I love your presentation.
Thank you.
As a fellow astronomer, I certainly believe that WIMPs will one day be discovered. At least I hope so.
Yeah.
What do you think, so you've done a bunch of research on this, what do you think is the next frontier for the future potential discovery of WIMPs? Where do you think is the next cutting edge?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of funding and research that's going on to studying WIMPs. I think I got to speak with somebody who worked at the Lux Zeppelin Observatory, and they were pretty much discussing a lot of it is just them trying to find evidence of it. A lot of the way that they do their research is based off of I think reasonable belief that this is where they would find it, this is where the funding is going into. And so maybe if there's some sort of breakthrough when it comes to at least finding the WIMP or some sort of technological breakthrough, I think that would be really neat to see. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Hi, I'm also an astronomer. I was wondering, you said on one of your slides that there's a bunch of different possible candidates for dark matter and the neutrinos, and I was wondering why you picked specifically WIMPs to work on this presentation instead of something that we have more evidence for existing, or other particles, I think you said the neutrinos?
Yeah, so I guess the first part, was I liked WIMPs because I thought the title WIMPs was really silly, and so I wanted to look into it. But also neutrinos are relativistic, and that means I think it's because they have zero mass and they move extremely fast. And so in terms of that, I feel this specific model I thought was very interesting and easy to understand. And so I looked into, instead of looking into neutrinos, which wouldn't necessarily fit this specific dark matter model, I thought not only because the WIMP name is really neat, it was a lot easier for me to understand and look into and then kind of present to other people as well. Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Just really quick, again, wonderful presentation. You mentioned technological breakthroughs, and I have in mind the LIGO experiment, right, for looking at gravitational waves. So can you say anything about what we need to do? We need a detector that's bigger, lower signal to noise? Or maybe we don't even know what we need? Where are we?
Honestly, I wish I knew the answer to that. A lot of the times, I would say like things are always getting bigger. They're always like building better technology and things like that. And so, at this point, I guess like maybe a bigger detector would work. Or I mean, like we don't know. We're looking at something that may or may not exist at all. And so it's the challenge in that is that while we have an idea of what we're looking for and we're putting in funding to find that, it's just like trying to see if you're just kind of like taking a crack at it until something breaks. Yeah.
Thank you so much.